I swear, I didn't mean to see any of this. I didn't want to. I can't breathe in here. They know I saw it. They know. If I don't make it out, tell them I tried.
The November sun was barely breaking through the gray clouds when Detective Rachel Cooper parked her squad car at the main gate of the Cumberland Correctional Institution. The prison stood before her as a grim concrete monolith wrapped in barbed wire. Rachel got out of the car, adjusted the shoulder holster under her jacket, and headed toward the checkpoint. She'd seen a lot of prisons in her 38 years of life, but this one seemed particularly bleak. The guard at the entrance, a full middle-aged man with faded blue eyes, took longer than usual to check her ID. Rachel waited patiently, studying his face. The nervousness she'd learned to recognize in her 15 years on the force was visible in every crinkle around his eyes. "Chief Davidson is waiting for you," the guard finally said, handing back the paperwork. "Second floor, office number 203. Rachel nodded and passed through the metal detector. The corridors of the prison were narrow, with low ceilings and fluorescent lighting that gave everything around her a sickly, yellowish tinge. Her heels tapped distinctly on the linoleum, echoing off the walls. Somewhere behind the thick doors, she could hear the muffled voices of prisoners, the metallic clanking of bars. Warden Roger Davidson met her at the door of his office. He was a tall, gray-haired man of about 55, with a military bearing and cold gray eyes. His handshake was firm, but Rachel noticed that he avoided a direct gaze. "Detective Cooper," Davidson said, gesturing her into the office. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Unpleasant history with Harris." The office was decorated strictly and functionally. A map of the state hung behind a large metal desk. Diplomas and photos from various official events were on the walls. Rachel sat down in the offered chair, took out a notebook and a pen. "Tell me what happened," she asked, watching Davidson's face carefully. Jermaine Harris, 29 years old, was serving time for drug trafficking. Guard Brown found him in his cell yesterday morning, hanging himself from a sheet tied to the ventilation grate. Davidson spoke in an even, official tone, like he was reading a report. "Everything points to suicide." "Who else was in the cell?" Rachel asked, taking notes. "His cellmate Wesley Green claims he was asleep and didn't hear anything." Davidson shrugged. "In principle, it's possible. Harris could have acted very quietly." Rachel looked up from her notebook. Something in the warden's tone alarmed her. He was too ready to accept the suicide theory. "I'd like to examine the scene," she said, "and talk to the men who found the body." "Of course." Davidson rose from his seat. "Brown is on duty now. He'll show you to your cell." They walked down the long corridor to the housing block. There was a heavy odor of disinfection mixed with something sour and unpleasant. Orange-robed prisoners sat in their cells or slowly strolled down the corridor under the supervision of guards. Some of them gave Rachel curious looks. Guard Kevin Brown was waiting for them at the entrance to cell block 3. He was a stout man of about 35, with a short haircut and a wary expression. When Davidson introduced him to the detective, Brown nodded briefly, but didn't extend a hand to shake. "Show me the camera," Rachel asked. Brown silently led her down the hall. They stopped at cell number 17. The door was open, and there was no one inside. Rachel stepped inside, looking around carefully. The cell was small, about 3 by 4 meters. 2 metal bunks, a small table, a wash basin, and a toilet. Everything was clean and neat. Too neat for a place where tragedy had struck the day before. Where exactly did you find the body?" Rachel asked, turning to Brown. "Over there, by the grate." Brown pointed to the ceiling vent. "He tied a sheet to the bars and, you know." Rachel moved closer, stood on tiptoe, examining the grate. The metal bars were slightly bent, but not enough to support the weight of a grown man. There were traces of cloth on one of the bars. "Did they take the sheet yet?" she asked. "Yes, to the morgue with the body," Davidson replied. Standard procedure. What time did you find the body? Brown hesitated for a moment before answering. About 7 o'clock in the morning. I was doing my usual rounds before breakfast. And when was the last time you saw Harris alive? The night before, during roll call, around 10 o'clock. Everything was normal, nothing suspicious. Rachel walked the perimeter of the cell, looking in every corner. Something was wrong here, but she couldn't quite figure out what yet. It was too clean, too neat. It lacked the chaos that usually accompanied such tragedies. "Where's his cellmate?" she asked. "Green's been moved to another cell," Davidson said. "Standard procedure after an incident. You want to talk to him?" Sure. But first, show me Harris's personnel file." They returned to the administration building. In Davidson's office, a folder with documents was already on the desk. Rachel opened it and began to study the contents. Jermaine Harris, 29 years old, sentenced to 8 years for cocaine trafficking. He'd been in prison for 3 years. Few disciplinary infractions, mostly minor altercations with fellow inmates, refusal to perform work duties. Nothing serious. "Did he ever exhibit suicidal tendencies?" Rachel asked, flipping through the pages. "No, never," Davidson replied. "Although, people here are good at hiding their intentions. There was nothing suspicious in Harris's medical records either. The usual colds, a couple of dental visits. No record of depression or any other mental illness." "Did he have any visitors?" Rachel kept asking. "His mother came once a month. Last time was 2 weeks ago." Davidson looked at the paperwork. "No one else?" "Letters?" "Occasional. Again, mostly from his mother." Rachel closed the folder and looked at the warden. There was definitely something odd about his demeanor. He was clearly in a hurry to close this case, to write it off as a suicide. "I'll need a list of all the staff who worked Monday night through Tuesday," she said, "and copies of the surveillance footage." Davidson's face darkened slightly. "We're having trouble with the cameras," he said. "The system is old, often glitchy. Half the cameras weren't working that night." "Which half?" "Including the camera that filmed the hallway outside Harris's cell." Rachel felt a familiar sense of hunting excitement rising in her. Too many coincidences for a simple suicide. "Good," she said, rising from her chair. "All the more reason for me to talk to people then. Let's start with Brown's guard." Davidson led her into a small interrogation room. 4 walls, a table, and 3 chairs. A few minutes later, Brown appeared. He sat down across from Rachel, folding his arms across his chest in a protective posture. "Tell me more about that night," Rachel asked, turning on the recorder. "From the beginning of your shift." "I came on duty at 11 o'clock at night," Brown began, looking away. "Just a regular shift, nothing special. Went around the blocks, checked the locks, everything was quiet." "What time was roll call?" 10, 11, and 7 in the morning. The first 2, everybody was in place." "Who else was on duty that night?" "Smith in cell block 1, Jones in cell block 2. I was in charge of block 3. Rachel took notes, watching Brown's facial expression carefully. He was definitely nervous, but everyone in prison gets nervous when the police show up. It didn't mean anything yet. "Describe what the body looked like when you found it." Brown wrinkled his nose as if the memory was unpleasant to him. He was hanging from the sheet. His feet were almost touching the floor. His face was, well, I knew right away there was nothing I could do. "What was his cellmate doing?" "Green was asleep. I woke him up when I called for help. He was in shock, couldn't say anything." "Has Harris been acting strange lately?" Brown hesitated, rubbed his chin. "I don't know. Maybe he'd been more quiet than usual, but a lot of people around here become withdrawn over time." Rachel asked a few more questions, but learned nothing new. Brown answered briefly, without too much detail. Either he really knew nothing, or he was very good at hiding information. After the interrogation, Rachel returned to her car. The sun was already setting, coloring the sky orange. She got behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. Instead, She pulled out her cell phone and dialed the coroner's office. "Dr. Simmons? This is Detective Cooper. Do you have the results on Jermaine Harris?" Just preliminary," the coroner said, "but I can tell you cause of death was strangulation. The noose was very tight." "Anything suspicious?" "A few bruises on the arms and torso. Could be from a struggle, could be from a routine prison altercation. We'll have a full report tomorrow." Rachel hung up the phone and thought. Nothing so far pointed to murder, but her intuition told her that something was amiss. There were too many little things that didn't add up. She started the car and drove out of the prison grounds. Tomorrow, she'd go back and talk to Harris's cellmate. Perhaps Wesley Green knew more than met the eye. The next morning was overcast and rainy. Rachel arrived at the prison early at 9:30, when most of the prisoners were still eating breakfast in the mess hall. She wanted to talk to Wesley Green in a quiet atmosphere, without fuss or prying eyes. Davidson met her at the entrance with a noticeable look of displeasure on his face. "Detective Cooper, I thought the case was closed," he said as he escorted her down the now familiar hallway. The coroner confirmed the suicide. "Just a preliminary report for now," Rachel replied without slowing down. "I need to finish interviewing witnesses." Wesley Green was brought into the same interview room. He was a short, thin man of about 45, with graying temples and intelligent dark eyes. Unlike Brown's guard, Green held himself calmly, even with some dignity. "Mr. Green," Rachel began, sitting down across from him, "tell me about Jermaine Harris. How long have you been cellmates?" "Almost 2 years," Green answered in a low, husky voice. "Ever since I was transferred to cell block 3. "How would you describe his character?" Green thought for a moment, rubbing his chin. Rachel noticed a few old tattoos on his arms and a fresh bruise on his knuckles. Jermaine was a normal guy. Didn't like conflict, stayed away from prison gangs, read a lot, wrote letters to his mother. He wasn't the kind of guy to give up. "What do you mean?" Jermaine was planning for life after his release. Said he wanted to open a small auto shop and he had a knack for mechanics. People like that don't commit suicide 5 years before the end of their sentence. Rachel scrutinized Green's face. There was sincerity in his voice, but she knew prisoners could be very persuasive when they needed to be. "Tell me about his last few days. Have you noticed any changes in his behavior?" "He hadn't been himself for the last week," Green admitted. "Sleeping badly, often getting up in the middle of the night, pacing his cell. Said it was getting unbearable in here." "Did he explain exactly what was bothering him?" Green cast a quick glance at the door, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Jermaine said he'd seen something he shouldn't have, but he wouldn't give details, just kept saying he couldn't stand another day here." "When was the last time he said those words?" "Sunday, the day before." "Before what happened?" "We were lying in our bunks after lights out, and he suddenly said, 'Wesley, I can't stand another day in here.' I asked what happened, but he turned his back to the wall and never answered again." Rachel took notes, glancing at Green from time to time. His story sounded plausible, but something about it alarmed her. "Were you asleep when it happened?" "I take sleeping pills prescribed by the prison doctor," Green explained. "I've had insomnia since I got here. I took a pill around 11 that night and only woke up when Brown started screaming." "So you didn't hear anything? No struggle, no sounds?" "Nothing. Sleeping pills are powerful." Rachel made a note of that remark. Too convenient. The only witness was dead asleep at just the critical moment. "Did Jermaine mention any problems with any of the prisoners or guards?" Green glanced at the door again, then leaned closer to the desk. "There's a lot going on here, Detective. Things you're better off keeping quiet about if you want to live to see your release." "I'm investigating a murder, Mr. Green. If you have information, now would be a good time to share it." "Murder?" Green leaned back in his chair, a look of surprise in his eyes. "So you don't believe in suicide either?" "I'm just exploring all the possibilities." "So what was Jermaine's story?" Green was silent for a long time, clearly weighing his words. "He talked about drugs." He finally said quietly, about seeing them being smuggled into the prison. Who was sneaking them in? He didn't say that. He only hinted that he knew where the dope was coming from in cell block 3. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Finally, something concrete. Did Jermaine use drugs himself? No, he was clean. After his arrest, he got clean. Said he'd never touch that stuff again. After the interview, Rachel asked Davidson to show her the daily routine in cell block 3. They went to his office, where the warden pulled out a thick file folder. Up at 6 in the morning, breakfast at 7, Davidson said monotonously. Then labor until lunch. After lunch, an hour's walk in the yard, then free time in the cells. Dinner at 6, bedtime at 10. Who's in charge of work assignments? Deputy Warden Carter and Chief Warden Brown. The same Brown who found the body. Yeah, Kevin's been here for 7 years, very reliable. Rachel went through the inmates' work roster. Jermaine was assigned to the laundry room, worked there 3 days a week. The rest of the days he helped out in the library. I need to see the security footage, she said. Davidson's face darkened. I told you yesterday, we're having problems with the system. Half the cameras weren't working that night. Show me the ones that were working. They went down to the basement, where there was a guard station with surveillance monitors. Behind a console sat a young guard with a pimply face who jumped up when his superiors appeared. Show the detective the footage from Monday through Tuesday, Davidson ordered. The guard drummed his fingers nervously on the keyboard. Black and white images of prison corridors and courtyards flashed on the screens. Rachel watched carefully. Here is the main corridor of the first block, the guard commented. And this is the second block, the third. He hesitated. The third wasn't recorded that night. Why? The server crashed around 11:30. Had to reboot the system, lost a few hours of recording time. How convenient, Rachel muttered. And the recordings from the other blocks show them in full. For the next hour, she studied the blurry footage from the cameras. Prisoners in their cells, guards making their rounds, empty corridors at night. Nothing suspicious, but nothing useful either. Were the cafeteria cameras working? She asked. Yeah, everything's fine there. Show me. An image of the prison canteen appeared on the screen. Long tables, a serving line, a kitchen behind a glass partition. Rachel watched a tape of breakfast on Monday, the day before Jermaine died. Stop, she said, noticing a familiar face. Who's the woman behind the serving line? Michelle Brown, Davidson replied. Our security guard's wife, works in the cafeteria as a cook. Rachel scrutinized the woman on the screen. Michelle Brown was an attractive woman in her 30s with dark hair and a slim figure. She handed out food to the prisoners, occasionally chatting with her co-workers. How long has she worked here? About 3 years, maybe. Good worker, no complaints. Interesting, Rachel said. Husband's a security guard, wife works in the cafeteria, a convenient combination. Davidson looked at her puzzled. What do you mean? Nothing in particular, just thinking out loud. Rachel asked for a copy of all the available records for the last 2 weeks. The tech put them on a flash drive, which she put in her purse. As Rachel left the prison, she reflected on the information she had received. Jermaine had seen something drug-related. He said he couldn't take another day of it, yet he was planning for a future after his release. The CCTV system conveniently broke down on the critical night, and the only witness was asleep under the influence of sleeping pills. Too many coincidences for a simple suicide. Rachel got in her car and pulled out her cell phone. She needed to talk to someone who knew the prison system inside out. She dialed the number of an old acquaintance of hers who worked for the Department of Corrections. Hey Tom, it's Rachel Cooper. I need counseling on a case. Yeah, the gruff voice on the other end of the line answered. How widespread is drug dealing in Cumberland Prison? Very widespread, Tom answered without hesitation. Especially in recent years, we just don't have the resources to control it. And how are drugs usually smuggled in? It varies. Through visitors, sometimes they bribe the guards. but most often it's through the canteen or medical staff. They have more options. I see. Thank you, Tom. Rachel, be careful. If you're investigating something drug-related in prison, remember, there could be some very serious people involved. Rachel hung up the phone and thought. The picture was starting to become clearer, but so far she only had guesses. To turn them into evidence, she needed to dig deeper. She started the car and drove to the police department. There, the coroner's report and maybe some more leads were waiting for her. The case of Jermaine Harris's suicide was getting more and more interesting. Rachel returned to the police department around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On her desk was a thick envelope from the coroner and several messages from coworkers. She poured herself a coffee from the machine in the hallway and settled down at her desk to study Dr. Simmons's report. The autopsy results were more interesting than she'd expected. Jermaine Harris had indeed died of strangulation, but there were bruises on his body that didn't fit the suicide pattern. 2 bruises on his forearms, as if someone had a firm grip on him. Abrasions on the knuckles of his right hand, indicating he was trying to defend himself. And best of all, they found skin particles under his fingernails that didn't belong to Jermaine himself. Rachel reread the report twice, making notes in the margins. Dr. Simmons was an experienced specialist, and his conclusions were rarely in doubt. If he'd written about signs of a struggle, then there were indeed signs of a struggle. She picked up the phone and dialed the coroner's number. "Doctor, this is Detective Cooper. Got your report on Harris. These bruises, how fresh are they?" "Judging by the color and condition of the tissue, no more than 12 hours at the time of death," Simmons replied. "So they appeared on the day of death or the night before." "And the skin particles under the fingernails?" "Sent it to DNA. We'll have the results in a few days, but I can tell you for sure it's not his skin." "Thank you, doctor. That's very important information." Rachel hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair. She now had good reason to believe Jermaine's death was a murder. All that remained was to find the killer and prove his guilt. She pulled out the flash drive with the surveillance footage and inserted it into the computer. She spent the next 2 hours scrutinizing the material, taking screenshots and notes. Most of the footage was boring. Inmates in their cells, guards at their posts, the usual prison routine. But in the canteen footage, she noticed a few interesting details. Michelle Brown was indeed working vigorously, serving food and putting away dishes. But every once in a while, she would approach certain inmates closer than usual, as if she were whispering something to them. And one time, Rachel noticed Michelle hand one of the prisoners something small hidden in a piece of bread. Rachel stopped the recording and zoomed in on the image. The quality wasn't very good, but she could make out the face of the prisoner. It was a thin black guy about 25 years old with a distinctive tattoo on his neck. She printed out the screenshot and put it in her case file folder. Tomorrow she would need to find out who this man was and what exactly Michelle Brown was handing him. Around 5 in the evening, Rachel decided to go to the prison again. This time she wanted to talk to Kevin Brown in more detail, without the presence of her superiors. She had a feeling the guard was hiding something. Davidson had gone home by then, and Rachel was able to talk to Brown informally. She found him in the staff break room, where he was drinking coffee and leafing through a newspaper. "Mr. Brown," she said, sitting down across from him at a small table. "May I ask you a few more questions?" Brown lifted his head from the paper. Irritation flashed in his eyes, but he nodded. "Sure, although I already told you everything yesterday. I'd like to go over the details. You said you found Harris's body around 7 in the morning during your routine rounds. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "And what time did you make your previous rounds?" Brown thought, rubbed his forehead with his hand. "I don't remember exactly. Probably about 5 o'clock in the morning. Yesterday you said you last saw Harris alive during roll call at 10 o'clock at night, and the rounds were at 11 o'clock, 5 o'clock a.m., and 7 o'clock. Is that correct?" Yeah. No." Brown hesitated, obviously trying to remember what he'd said the day before. "What I meant was the 1 a.m. rounds, then the 5 a.m. rounds." Rachel wrote it down in her notebook without commenting on the contradiction. Brown was definitely confusing his statement. "Kevin, may I call you by your first name?" she asked in a friendly tone. "Tell me about your job. Do you like it here?" "It's a normal job." Brown shrugged. "The pay is regular. The benefits are good. It's not too bad for our town." "Does your wife work at the prison too?" "Yeah, Michelle in the cafeteria. We met here 3 years ago. It's convenient. Commute to work together. Home together." "Yeah, convenient." Rachel noticed how Brown's shoulders tensed at the mention of his wife. Interesting reaction. "Kevin, I've been going over the security footage. I noticed your wife is very attentive to the inmates. She even gives some of them extra servings. Michelle's a kind woman. She feels sorry for these guys. Especially the one with the neck tattoo." She handed him something in the bread. Brown's face turned pale. He put the newspaper aside and looked at Rachel warily. "I don't know what you're talking about. Kevin, I'm investigating a murder. If you have any information that might help—" "Murder?" he interrupted. "But Harris killed himself." "We have reason to believe otherwise, and I think you know more than you're saying." Brown rose from his chair, rubbing his hands together nervously. "I've got to go on duty," he muttered. "One more question. Did Jermaine Harris ever complain to you about anything? Talked about problems?" "No, never. He didn't talk much at all." "Did he ever complain about the drugs in prison?" "What drugs?" Brown was too quick to ask. "I don't know about any drugs." Rachel looked at him carefully. The reaction was too violent for an innocent man. "Okay, Kevin, that's it for now. But we'll talk more." Brown nodded and hurried out of the room. Rachel remained seated at the table, pondering what she had heard. The guard was definitely hiding something, and that something had to do with his wife. She left the jail and got into her car, but didn't drive away right away. Instead, she parked in the shade of the trees across from the service parking lot and waited. Half an hour later, Michelle Brown emerged from the building with 2 other women from the cafeteria staff. Rachel scrutinized the security guard's wife. Michelle was really attractive. Slim, with correct facial features and a confident gait. She got into an older sedan and drove out of the parking lot. Rachel followed her, keeping her distance. Michelle drove down the main street of the city, then turned into a residential neighborhood with small houses and neat yards. She stopped at a 2-story house with a green fence and went inside. Rachel wrote down the address and house number. The house looked too good for a family with both spouses working in government offices. New roof, fresh paint on the walls, an expensive car in the garage. Either Brown had additional sources of income, or they were living beyond their means. She pulled out her cell phone and called the police department. "This is Detective Cooper. I need to run something through the database. Kevin Brown works as a guard at the Cumberland Correctional Facility. Does he have any priors, any debts, anything interesting financially?" "I'll check it out," the desk clerk said. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Rachel waited, watching the Browns' house. The lights were on in the windows. The neighbors' children were playing in the yard. Just an ordinary, quiet American suburb where everyone knows their neighbors and everyone lives a peaceful, measured life. The phone rang 15 minutes later. "Detective Cooper? I got an update on Brown. No criminal record, but some interesting details. 3 years ago, he had a large credit card debt of about $30,000. Then he paid it all off abruptly. For the last 2 years, he declared income only from work in prison, but bank transfers show much more money. Where did the money come from? Cash, through different banks. Classic laundering scheme. Thank you. What about his wife? Michelle Brown, née Jones. Also clean. But the finances are just as shady. Works as a prison cook, but spends like a bank manager." Rachel hung up the phone with satisfaction. A picture was beginning to emerge. The Browns clearly had additional income that they hadn't declared. And the only explanation for the guard and the cook could be the drug dealing in prison. She started the car and drove home. Tomorrow she would have to dig deeper, find direct evidence of Brown's connection to the drug trade. and find out exactly what Jermaine Harris had seen. At home, Rachel made herself dinner and sat at the kitchen table with the case files. She laid out photographs, reports, interview notes. On a separate sheet of paper, she drew a diagram of possible events. Jermaine had accidentally witnessed Brown or his wife passing drugs to prisoners. He had no intention of turning anyone in, but his words that he couldn't take another day frightened Brown. The guard decided that Jermaine wanted to pawn him off in exchange for parole and killed him by staging a suicide. Makes sense, but there wasn't enough direct evidence yet. We needed to find that inmate with the neck tattoo who was getting drugs from Michelle Brown. Maybe he'd agree to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rachel put the paperwork away in a folder and went to take a shower. Tomorrow promised to be a challenging day, and she needed to get some sleep. The case of Jermaine Harris's death was getting more and more complicated, but she felt she was close to solving it. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the police department at 7:30. She had hardly slept at all, thinking over the details of the case, and she wanted to finish the investigation as quickly as possible. On her desk was a new envelope from the lab, the results of DNA analysis of the skin particles found under Jermaine Harris's fingernails. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. The result was beyond her expectations. The DNA belonged to Kevin Brown. She now had irrefutable proof that there had been a physical struggle between the guard and the prisoner shortly before Jermaine's death. Rachel leaned back in her chair, feeling both satisfaction and anxiety at the same time. Satisfaction that her suspicions had been confirmed, and anxiety at the realization that the hard work of gathering additional evidence lay ahead. DNA testing alone was enough to make an arrest, but stronger evidence was needed to convict her in court. She pulled the case file out of the safe and once again scrutinized all the evidence collected. The contradictions in Brown's testimony, his nervousness at the mention of drugs, the family's suspicious finances, the CCTV footage of his wife handing something to the prisoners. All of this, combined with the DNA analysis, amounted to a strong evidentiary base. Rachel immediately called prosecutor Daniel Harris, with whom she had worked on many high-profile cases. Harris was an experienced lawyer who never went to court without 100% certainty of victory. Dan, I have evidence of a murder at Cumberland Prison. I need an arrest warrant and a search warrant. What kind of evidence? The prosecutor asked in his usual businesslike tone. Suspect DNA under the victim's fingernails, inconsistencies in statements, drug-related motive. Is that enough? More than enough. Warrants will be ready in an hour. But Rachel, be prepared for the defense to argue that the DNA got under the victim's fingernails by accident during some routine contact. I've got something else. The autopsy results show that the victim's body shows signs of a struggle that was attempted to be disguised. And a witness says the victim talked about seeing something drug-related. All right, That should be enough to get you started. Good luck with that. Rachel took 2 colleagues with her, Detective Michael Ronson and Sergeant Lisa Parker. Ronson was a large man in his 40s, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan who knew how to remain calm in any situation. Parker, on the other hand, was young and energetic, but also very professional. Rachel wanted to arrest Brown on the job so he wouldn't have time to warn his wife or destroy evidence. On the way to the jail, she explained the details of the case to her co-workers. Ronson listened silently, nodding occasionally, while Parker asked clarifying questions about the arrest procedure. Do you think he'll try to escape? Parker asked. I doubt it, Rachel replied. He's not the kind of person who goes to extreme measures. He'll probably try to deny everything or blame it on his wife. They arrived at the prison around 10 in the morning. Davidson met them at the entrance with an obvious look of bewilderment on his face. Rachel noticed that the warden looked tired and tense. Obviously, recent events had seriously agitated him. Detective Cooper, what's going on? Why do you need backup? I have a warrant for the arrest of Kevin Brown on suspicion of the murder of Jermaine Harris, Rachel replied, holding out the paperwork. Davidson took the warrant with trembling hands and scrutinized it. The warden's face turned pale and then red with anger. That's impossible. Kevin has been working for me for 7 years. He's not capable of murder. This is some kind of mistake. I'm sorry, but it's not a mistake. We have hard evidence to prove his guilt. What evidence? I have a right to know what my employee is accused of. Rachel understood Davidson's outrage. For him, it wasn't just the arrest of a subordinate, it was the collapse of his authority as a supervisor. DNA analysis showed that Brown's skin was under the victim's fingernails. That suggests a physical struggle between the two. In addition, we have reason to believe that Brown was dealing drugs in prison with the help of his wife. Drugs? Davidson shook his head. I never noticed anything suspicious about his behavior. Where is he now? At his post in cell block 3, but I insist on being present at the arrest. As head of the facility, I'm responsible for everything that happens here. As you wish. But remember, do not interfere with the arrest procedure. They walked down the familiar corridors to cell block 3. Rachel noticed that the prisoners escorted their group with wary glances. Apparently, news travels fast in prison, and everyone already knew the police had arrived. Kevin Brown was standing at the lock control panel checking some paperwork. He was dressed in a guard's uniform, dark blue pants, light blue shirt with epaulettes, leather boots. On his belt hung handcuffs, a baton, and a walkie-talkie. When he saw the group approaching, he looked up, and Rachel saw his face contorted with fear. "Kevin Brown," she said loudly, showing her ID. "You are under arrest for the murder of Jermaine Harris." Brown staggered back, dropping the file folder. The sheets scattered across the floor, rustling and sliding across the linoleum. His hand instinctively reached for his baton, but he stopped in time, realizing the futility of resistance. "This is some kind of mistake," he muttered, glancing back and forth at the detectives and his boss. "I didn't do anything. Harris hanged himself. Everyone knows it." "We have a DNA test," Rachel said, nodding to Ronson, who began handcuffing Brown. "Your skin under the victim's fingernails. Explain that." "Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we bumped into each other in the hallway once, or when I was taking him off the noose. Anything could happen in that situation." Ronson professionally secured Brown's hands behind his back, checked to make sure the cuffs weren't too tight, and took a step back. Brown stood with his head down, breathing heavily. "Kevin," Davidson interrupted him, his voice filled with both anger and frustration. "If you've done something wrong, it's better to tell the truth now. It might help you in court." Brown looked at his boss, then at the detectives. In his eyes was the desperation of a hunted animal who realizes that all avenues of escape are cut off. "I want a lawyer," he finally said. "That's your right," Rachel agreed. "But first, we need to talk to your wife." Brown's face contorted in horror. He jerked forward, but the handcuffs and Ronson's strong arm held him in place. "Leave Michelle alone. She had nothing to do with this. This is all my doing. Then explain to me what your wife was passing food to the prisoners. We have security footage." "What tapes?" Brown tried to object, but there was no confidence in his voice. Rachel pulled out of her purse a printout of a screenshot that showed Michelle Brown handing something to a prisoner in a piece of bread. "This is the footage. The time is 13:42 Monday. Your wife is handing prisoner Marcus Thompson something hidden in a piece of bread. What was it, Mr. Brown?" Brown was silent, but Rachel could see he was ready to break. All it took was a little more pressure. "We'll arrest her in an hour," she continued, "and we'll search your house. I wonder what we'll find there. Drugs, money, sales records?" "Wait," Brown said quietly. "Michelle really had nothing to do with this. It was all me." Davidson looked at his employee with horror and disbelief. "Kevin, what were you doing? Tell me none of this is true." "I was selling drugs to the inmates," Brown admitted, his head down so low that his chin was almost touching his chest. "Michelle only helped pass the stuff through the mess hall. She thought they were drugs for sick inmates who didn't have enough medicine from the prison medicine cabinet." "How long had this been going on?" Rachel asked. "Almost 2 years. Started when we got into loan debt. First just marijuana, then he started moving heroin and cocaine. Where'd you get the drugs from? I got contacts in the city, a friend from the army. He used to sell on the streets. I'd buy from him, then resell it here for triple the price. Parker was recording every word on a tape recorder, and Ronson was watching the prisoners, who were gathered around the bars of their cells, trying to hear what they were saying. And Jermaine Harris? Rachel asked. What happened between you two? Brown raised his head, tears in his eyes. He saw me handing a package to one of the cons in the laundry room. That was Friday, 4 days before what happened. Jermaine was working there that day, folding clean laundry. I didn't see him right away, and when I did, it was too late. What did he say? Nothing at first. He just looked at me and turned away. But I knew he understood. Then, an hour later, he came up to me in the hallway and said, I saw everything, but it doesn't concern me. I'll keep quiet. And I believed him, because Jermaine wasn't the kind of guy to rat people out. But then something changed? Yeah. Over the weekend, he started acting weird, telling his cellmate that he couldn't take it anymore, that he had to get out at any cost. Then Monday morning, he came up to me and said, I need to talk to my superiors. There are things they need to know. Rachel nodded. The picture was becoming clearer. And you thought he wanted to turn you in exchange for parole? Yes, exclaimed Brown. I panicked. I have a mortgage on my house. My daughter is going to college. My wife is treating my mother. If I was arrested, my family would be destitute. So you decided to kill him? Brown was silent for a long time, struggling with himself. Finally, he nodded. I didn't plan to kill him. I swear I just wanted to talk to him, convince him to keep quiet, offer him money or something. Tell me what happened that night. I waited for Green to fall asleep. I gave him a double dose of sleeping pills in his water during dinner. I have access to medical supplies. Then I shut down the surveillance system, told the tech on duty to reboot the server. What time did you get to Jermaine's? Around 1:30 in the morning. Opened the cell with my keys and walked in. Jermaine was awake, sitting on his bunk, reading a book. When he saw me, he stood up and asked, What do you want? Brown fell silent, remembering that night. Rachel waited patiently for him to continue. I started to explain that he had misunderstood my words, that I wasn't doing anything illegal, but he grinned and said, Don't take me for a fool, Brown. I know drugs when I see them. Then I offered him money for his silence, $500 into his prison account. Did he accept? No, said he wasn't for sale. He was tired of all this shit and wanted to start a clean life. And to do that, he needed to get out of jail as soon as possible. And that's when the fight started? Not right away. I tried to talk him down, explained that I had a family, kids. But he started raising his voice, said he was going to go to Davidson tomorrow and tell him everything. And then Brown swallowed. I grabbed him by the throat to shut him up. But he started fighting back, clawing at my hands, trying to get away. How long did the struggle last? A few minutes. He was stronger than me, younger, but I was furious, and the adrenaline was getting the better of me. Eventually, I managed to pin him against the wall and choke him out. There was dead silence in the corridor. Even the prisoners fell silent, as if feeling the weight of the confession. And then you staged the suicide? Yes. I took the sheet off his bunk, tied it to the ventilation grate and made a noose. Then I picked up the body and hung it up, tried to make it look real. Rachel nodded to Ronson and Parker. She had a full confession recorded on a tape recorder and plenty of details that would be verifiable. The case could be considered closed. Kevin Brown, she said formally, you are under arrest on charges of first-degree murder of Jermaine Harris and drug trafficking. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you by the state. She read out the standard wording of a suspect's rights, and Ronson began to lead Brown toward the exit. The guard walked slowly, head down, as if he had suddenly aged 10 years. "Detective," Davidson called out to him, "what's going to happen to the prison now? The reporters will be on us like vultures." "That's not my problem," Rachel replied. "But I suggest you conduct an internal investigation and check all employees for involvement in illegal activities." "What about his wife? Are you really going to arrest her?" "She's an accessory to a crime. But if she cooperates and testifies against her husband, she might get probation or community service." They went into the dining room where Michelle Brown, in a white apron and cap, was cutting vegetables for a salad. She was working intently, not noticing the police officers approaching. When she saw them, she immediately realized something serious had happened. "Where's Kevin?" she asked, dropping the knife on the cutting board. "Your husband has been arrested on murder and drug charges," Rachel said. "He confessed to the murder of Jermaine Harris and told of your involvement in selling drugs to the inmates." Michelle slumped in her chair, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I knew it wouldn't go well," she whispered through her tears. "I told him to get out of it, but he wouldn't listen, kept saying we needed the money." "So, you knew you were passing drugs?" "Not right away. At first, Kevin said they were drugs for sick prisoners who lacked medical attention. But then I realized they were drugs. The people who were taking them were acting too weird." "So why did you keep going?" "I needed money for my mother's lung cancer. The surgery costs $50,000, and our insurance only covers half of that." Michelle lifted her tear-stained face. "I knew what I was doing was wrong, but what could I do?" Rachel felt some sympathy for the woman. Michelle wasn't a hardened criminal, just caught in a difficult situation and made the wrong choice. But the law is the law. "Michelle Brown, you're under arrest as an accessory to drug trafficking. But if you cooperate with the investigation and testify against your husband, we can help you get a lenient sentence." The woman nodded without raising her head. "I'll tell you everything I know. Just tell me honestly, did Kevin really kill that man?" "He admitted it himself," Rachel answered. "Oh my God," Michelle whispered. "I had no idea he was capable of such a thing." By evening, the formalities were completed. The Brown couple sat in separate holding cells at the police headquarters. Their home was searched, $12,000 in cash, heroin, and cocaine residue, and a notebook with prisoners' names and payment amounts were found. Prosecutor Harris was pleased with the evidence gathered and confident of a successful case in court. Rachel sat in her office filling out the last of the paperwork for the case. It was already dark outside the window, the corridor was quiet. Most of her colleagues had long since gone home. Only the employees on duty were still at work, preparing for the night shift. She thought of Jermaine Harris, who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. A young man who planned a new life after his release. He dreamed of opening a car service and helping his mother. He became a victim of someone else's greed and paranoia. Jermaine was not going to turn anyone in. He just wanted to get out of prison where corruption was flourishing, but he was killed for fear of exposure. The case was closed, the criminals were arrested, and justice was served. Kevin Brown would get life in prison for first-degree murder. His wife would get a few years in prison or probation for cooperating with the investigation. But Rachel realized this was just the tip of the iceberg. The system was rotting from the inside out, and one arrest wouldn't change anything dramatically. She gathered the documents into a folder, turned off the light, and headed for the exit. Tomorrow, a new case would start, a new investigation. And somewhere in other prisons, other guards would continue their dirty business, and other prisoners would risk becoming victims of corruption. But at least Jermaine Harris got justice. His killer will be held accountable for his crimes, and the memory of a young man who dreamed of a second life will not be forgotten.